Do you like guys who are attractive?
You look good.
All for you, baby.
Let me get a good look at you.
Whoa, slow down.
In this video, we're going to look at the traits available to your empire in Stellaris. We're going to look at the regular biological traits, the traits available to hive-mind empires, the brand new traits that you can get through the new Overtuned origin with Stellaris Toxoids, and of course, we'll not just look at the positive traits, but the negative traits as well. We'll go through what each of them does and assign them a position in the tier list so you can get an idea of how powerful I think they are. You might want to get a snack and a drink because, let me tell you, there are a phenomenal number of traits now available to us as a biological empire in Stellaris, and we will be going through all of them. Make sure you're sitting comfortably and we'll begin. Let's start right at the bottom with the worst traits in the F tier. Now, I have three separate categories here, three separate columns. The first column is the positive traits. From bottom to top, as always, these are the traits you don't want to pick near the bottom for one reason or another, and near the top, traits that are really, really good. The second category that I have distinguished is the traits from the Overtuned origin. These are generally much more powerful than the regular traits because they're so much cheaper. So if I were to put them in with the regular traits, I feel they would generally almost all end up in the A and S tier. So I do want to distinguish between them, and I've split them up that way. The third and final column here is your negative traits. You might be asking yourself, why on earth aren't all of the negative traits down in the F tier? Well, you get points refunded for taking negative traits. So sometimes if you can take a negative trait that will not affect you very much, it becomes very, very positive overall for your empire because you can take more of the fantastic positive traits and get a better net boost out of that. So what we're looking at here with the negative traits is which traits aren't so bad so we can take them and therefore take other better traits. But anyway, what is the first trait down in the F tier? Let's have a look. Inorganic Breath is a new trait that has been included with the Stellaris Toxoids DLC. It gives you plus 0.02 monthly exotic gases per pop, a 50% increase to pop upkeep, and costs a whopping 3 points. Why is this all the way down here in the F tier? Well, lithoids have a similar trait that gives them half the amount of monthly exotic gases plus 0.01 per pop, and that only costs 2 points and doesn't come with the whopping 50% increase in upkeep, which is really, really high. The high 3-point cost and that massive increase in upkeep is definitely not worth a very, very small amount of monthly exotic gases per pop. Conformist costs 2 points and gives us plus 30% governing ethics attraction. It is generally very easy to make sure that your primary ethics are well represented in your population. You do not need this plus 30% governing ethics attraction. You can support governing factions at the moment without paying any cost or upkeep for doing so, and that massively boosts the governing ethics attraction, so this is totally not needed. Conservationist costs a single point and gives you minus 10% pop consumer goods upkeep. The majority of your consumer goods expenditure will not be from pop consumer goods upkeep, it will be from upkeep from jobs. So this only really affects a small amount of your overall expenditure for consumer goods. It does cost only 1 point, which is nice, but the overall effect is so minimal, there are much better things to take. That being said, the more pops you have in your empire with this trait, the greater the net benefit will be for your empire in consumer goods upkeep reduction in terms of raw actual numbers. So as the game goes on, it will improve. Possibly you might want to mod this in quite a lot later into the game, but generally speaking, it's easier to just get more consumer goods. Venerable on the surface would seem like quite a good trait. It gives you plus 80 years of leader lifespan, so your leaders pretty much will never die, at least until very late in the game, by which point you'll have lots of extra technologies and traditions and benefits and boosts to increase leader lifespan. It does cost 4 points. Why is it here in the F tier though? Well, as I just mentioned, there are many ways of increasing your leader lifespan. There are traditions, technologies, policies that do so, and usually you can get your hands on these before the majority of your leaders die. You don't need to use this trait to increase your lifespan most of the time and keep your leaders alive. Even something like the new Overtuned origin, which reduces leader lifespan, generally speaking, I probably wouldn't recommend you get Venerable in addition to some of those traits, because you can actually offset it as long as you keep the negative consequences of the Overtuned traits manageable, by which I mean about 30 to 40 years worth. Nomadic costs a single point and increases your pop growth from immigration by 15% and reduces resettlement cost by 25%. In the very early game, you will get some benefits from this increase to pop growth from immigration, but quite a lot later in the game, generally speaking, after your colonies are mature, there is very little pop growth from immigration around. The main benefit to this is the reduced resettlement cost of 25%, which is nice and does improve the longer the game lasts, but overall, it's not a very powerful trait that is going to do more than save you a tiny amount of energy and unity, if at all. Resilient increases your defense army damage by 50% and costs only a single point. Wasting points on increase to defense army damage is not a good idea. The planetary invasion part of this game is very minor in scope, unless you're playing some sort of meme build where you're expecting to get invaded in a PvP session and defense army damage like this could be quite helpful. It's next to worthless. Very Strong costs a whopping 3 points and increases your army damage by 40%. As previously mentioned, that's not so great. The main benefit here is plus 5% to worker and menial drone pop resource output, but I must point out that there are so many ways of increasing worker and pop resource output. Spending 3 whole points on doing this by only 5% would be quite a mistake. Talented increases your leader level cap by 1 for only a single point. Why is this one basically useless? Well, there are lots of ways in game to increase your leader level cap as the game goes on. Generally speaking, unless you've got some pretty insane bonuses to your leader experience gain, you're not really going to be reaching your leader level cap, and even if you do, it won't be very long before you're getting another +1 from a tradition or something else. So I wouldn't recommend you waste a point on this because the returns are so tiny. And the opportunity cost cannot be understated. These yellow traits now are the Overtuned traits. They almost all give a negative leader lifespan penalty and cost pretty much 1 point across the board, though some of the higher up traits do cost a little bit more. The traits that have found their way into the F tier, in my opinion, from these Overtuned traits are Express Tradition, plus 10% unity from jobs for a single point and minus 10 years of leader lifespan, and Gene Mentorship, minus 10 years of leader lifespan for plus 25% leader experience gain and a cost of 1 point. Both of these are identical to other traits that you already have available that cost only a single point, and they give you an extra minus 10 years of leader lifespan. Yes, you can use Damn the Consequences to double the effects from these, but that's at a cost of plus 100% pop upkeep, and basically I would recommend you never take these two and instead take the regular versions of these, the same price, same effect, and don't give you a nasty minus 10 years of leader lifespan. And Low Maintenance gives you minus 10% pop consumer good upkeep at the cost of 1 point. Again, you're probably better taking the equivalent trait to this, which is still not particularly good anyway. The negative traits down here in the F tier are generally so bad and so inimical, and mainly you want to have the opposite effects to these happening to your pops. You simply should pretty much never take them. There are a couple of exceptions which I will talk about, but let's dive into them. Non-adaptive reduces your habitability by 10%. For any regular empire, this means a reduction of 5% to resource output, an increase in resource pop upkeep, and on top of that, a reduction to pop growth. All of the things that we probably want in the game and don't want to be taking negative penalties for. On the other hand, if you are Void Dwellers and you have the habitat preference, this can be completely ignored, so non-adaptive for Void Dwellers is a free pick and should always be your first negative trait pick. Repugnant reduces your amenities from jobs by 20% and refunds you with 2 points. Reducing your amenities from jobs by that much means you'll have to have more pops working amenity producing jobs, and that means your overall economy will suffer as you'll have a lower pop efficiency. What I mean by pop efficiency is that you'll have to have, as I mentioned, more pops working a certain job, and therefore of let's say 100 pops, you might have 2 or 3 less pops working resource producing jobs like an metallurgist. Instead, they'll be working something like an entertainer job. Finally, there is Slow Breeders. This reduces your pop growth by 10%. You might want to put this on something like a Necrophage that will never have pop growth. That can work quite well, but otherwise avoid it like the plague. Because in Stellaris, pops means power. And if you're enjoying this video, please genetically modify that like button for maximum growth. Now we've made it up to the C tier. Traits in this tier are quite a bit better than in the F tier, don't worry, but most of the time you're probably still not going to pick them. Generally speaking, they have some fantastic niche uses, but mostly on most species in most situations, you're probably not going to want them. Noxious is one of the new traits from the Stellaris Toxoids species pack, and its effects, I think, can be somewhat misunderstood. This trait gives you a minimum species habitability of 30%, that means your pops will never have a habitability below 30%, and it reduces your species habitability cap by 30%, meaning most of the time you will never have a habitability above 70%. There are a few exceptions to this. On worlds like Gaia worlds, as well as Ecumenopolis worlds, you'll still hit that 100% habitability cap, so the negative part of this is completely ineffective. But on general worlds, you do get stuck between a 30 and 70% habitability range. After that, your army damage is increased by 50%, your housing usage goes up 10%, and then we get into the weird effects. Happiness per noxious pop minus 1%. This does not affect the species with the noxious trait. This is all of the non-noxious pops on the planet that will receive minus 1% happiness per noxious pop. Okay, it is a little confusing in this tooltip. Following that, every noxious pop receives 2% additional happiness per non-noxious pop. There is a fantastic way to use this to maximize the effects of slavery, for example, on your world. In that case, it's an auto pick on any slaving empire as long as it is not on your core world, where you'll get that negative reduction to habitability that is really unpleasant. I have a video going through that. It's about how it basically makes Stellaris into a pyramid scheme. I'll link that in the description if you want to check it out. Otherwise though, most of the time I wouldn't recommend you take Noxious. Extremely Adaptive costs 4 points and gives you plus 20% habitability. On your ideal worlds, that should mean you have 100% habitability on those worlds. It is a bit useless at the very start of the game though, because it will not affect your capital planet, as you'll already be at 100% habitability, and therefore for the whopping 4 points that it costs, it isn't that great. Yes, you can colonize other worlds more easily, but as the game goes on, you'll find more and more ways of increasing your habitability, be that through technology, genetically modifying your species to be the right habitability type, or becoming synthetic or something like that. That then means that Extremely Adaptive gets worse and worse as a trait as the game goes on. Communal reduces pop housing usage by 10%. Now with logistic pop growth, it is somewhat helpful because it will increase your logistic pop growth due to the reduction in housing used, because that does affect your planet capacity and the nature of the equations done for how logistic pop growth actually works. Overall, this gets better and better as the game goes on, and also means you can cram more pops onto the same planet, but generally speaking, it's a very minimal effect and is an edge case at best. I should mention that on habitats, this is much better, because on habitats you'll be constantly struggling for housing usage, housing space, and logistic pop growth. Docile costs 2 points and reduces your empire size from pops by 10%. Given there are no ways of actually countering empire size, we can now only reduce it. This used to be called empire sprawl. Now we have to do things like add docile, take traditions, that sort of thing, to counter this negative effect, which increases the technology and tradition cost as well as our edict cost later in the game. At the start of the game, this is next to useless, and for quite a while after the start, so I'd only recommend you really mod this in later on. It does get more and more powerful and more important the bigger your empire gets and the more pops you get in your empire, as pops are the largest factor in empire size. Enduring costs 1 point and gives you plus 20 years leader lifespan. It suffers from most of the issues that Venerable suffers from, and generally speaking, I'd recommend you go for something that increases Unity or Society research gain instead for the same cost, because you can get to the bonuses that will increase your leader lifespan faster, and that provides more marginal effects and marginal bonuses as well, rather than just the leader lifespan bonus here. Agrarian costs you 2 points and increases your food output from jobs by 15%. This can be rather useful on livestock pops, or if you're using the catalytic processor civic and have a food-based economy for producing alloys, but otherwise you really don't want to have any farmer jobs or as few farmer jobs as you can possibly have. Instead, produce food with hydroponic bays on star bases or buy it in the market. Quick Learners costs just 1 point and increases your leader experience gain by 25%. This is marginally better than Talented because it will have more of an impact more quickly. However, there are other ways of getting increase to leader experience gain, and additionally, because the difference in XP needed to level up is not constant, but the bonuses from going up each level is a constant increase, this means at the higher levels, you're not really going to be getting that much bang for your buck out of this trait. Strong costs only 1 point, gives you 20% army damage and plus 2.5% worker and menial drone pop resource output. Basically, the only bonus you're really going to see here is that 2.5% additional pop resource output. A 2.5% bonus really speaks for itself here. Radiotrophic is now quite an interesting trait because we can finally terraform tomb worlds using the Relentless Industrialist Civic. This replaces half of the food or minerals upkeep of the pop with energy. There is no energy upkeep on tomb worlds, so basically it's a 50% pop upkeep reduction on tomb worlds, and you get plus 10% tomb world pop growth speed along with 10% tomb world habitability. Outside of the realm of having a tomb world focused empire though, it is pretty much useless. In the C tier for Overtuned traits, we have each of the economy boosting traits here. Farm Appendages increases food from jobs by 15%, Dedicated Miner increases minerals from jobs by 15%, and Technical Talent increases energy from jobs by 15% as well. All three cost a single point and reduce your leader lifespan by 10 years. The regular versions of these only cost 2 points apiece, and really a lot of the time aren't that fantastic in terms of traits anyway, especially the Farm Appendages trait as I've just covered, so I'm ranking all of these down here in the C tier because when it comes to Overtuned traits, you can do better. However, that being said, if you've got a slave race, cram them full of these Overtuned traits because you simply do not care about the negative leader lifespan modifiers if they can't become leaders. When it comes to negative traits in the C tier, mainly here we have traits that are going to be reducing your output or really quite impacting you a lot at the start of the game, though they can be mitigated later on. But Stellaris is a game where a small advantage early on will snowball into a massive advantage later, so taking things that disadvantage you in a large way at the start of the game is not really a good idea. Wasteful increases your pop consumer goods upkeep by 10%. This is going to be a little bit annoying at the start of the game because it's probably going to put you into a low consumer goods output or possibly even negative output right when you start. And it's going to mean for a small amount of time, consumer goods are an issue for your empire, or at least more of an issue than for another empire. But that being said, the impact of this one is still quite minor. It is probably the best of the negative traits here in the C tier. Fleeting reduces your leader lifespan by 10 years and refunds a single point. This 10 years though can be quite a lot. Generally speaking, I tend to find if I take Fleeting, my leaders will die before I can get the technology or traditions to make them survive. So from that perspective, it's very annoying to have to reset all of my leaders after the first 30 in-game years. Slow Learners reduces your leader experience gain by 25%, and that can be really quite annoying and painful, especially at the lower levels, as you'll find you level up quite a bit slower at those lower XP brackets. Quarrelsome reduces your unity from jobs by 10%. There are actually very few ways of increasing your unity from jobs output. There are very few bonuses like this in the game, so reducing your unity from jobs in this way is probably not a very good idea. On the other hand, if most of your unity will be produced by something like trade, or if you're going to have a trade league, it's probably absolutely fine to take this trait. Weak refunds you a single point, gives you minus 20% army damage, and reduces your worker and menial drone pop resource output by 2.5%. It isn't a massively big deal, but it isn't something you want to do across the board. I wouldn't recommend you take negatives that reduce your output. There are better negatives here that we can take that will have less of an impact on our empire. Decadent is a fantastic trait for necrophage species, but otherwise for regular species I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Workers and slaves will get minus 10% happiness. Happiness directly translates into stability, so this should reduce your overall resources from jobs across an entire planet. Just like weak, you probably don't want to have that happen. But what do you think about this tier list? Do you agree with where I've placed these traits, or do you have completely different opinions? I would love to hear from you. For the first few hours after this goes live, I will try to read through all of the comments and respond to as many as I can if you comment down below. In the B tier, we now have traits that have genuine good and or powerful uses. They are probably reasonably cost efficient, and you might take them some of the time. However, they probably have some drawbacks, or alternatively, there are probably better options out there that can help our empire in a similar way, and that's why they've wound up here in the B tier. Adaptive increases your habitability by 10%. Just like extremely adaptive, it suffers from similar drawbacks. However, it is cheaper at only 2 points and doesn't increase your habitability all the way up to the cap, so it tends to be effective for longer in game. That being said, there is a trait that does what extremely adaptive and adaptive can do for you early game whilst costing a lot less. We'll get to that trait a little bit later though. Industrious increases your minerals from jobs by 15%. Ingenious is the similar version that does the same for energy. Both of these cost 2 points. Energy and minerals are both very important for building, and that's why they both sit here in the B tier. However, you get some massive bonuses from technology and other things in the game, so as the game goes on, you're going to find this 15% is less and less relevant overall. And that's why you might want to spend your trade points in another area where the bonus is either more important or harder to get. Natural Sociologists increases society research from jobs by 15%. However, the society tree is arguably the least powerful of the 3 research trees, and therefore this is the least powerful of the 3 traits with a similar effect like this. It is still good to increase your research, but there are other better alternatives. Exotic Metabolism is an interesting new trait that has arrived with Stellaris Toxoids. You can only access it by completing the biological ascension path and researching the special technology at the end of that path. It gives you plus 25% habitability, plus 25% pop growth speed, plus 50 years leader lifespan at the upkeep cost of plus 0.125 exotic gases. That is not so great. It does cost only a single point, which is very fantastic, but let's dive into this. So it's basically a mix of 2 other traits that you can get your hands on without the really nice plus 5% resources from jobs output that Robust has. That increase to exotic gas upkeep is going to knacker your pop efficiency because you're going to have both lots of pops working the exotic gas resource producing job, and you're going to need lots of building slots producing exotic gases. I wouldn't really recommend we take this unless we absolutely are stuck with only 1 trait point left to spend, or 1 trait pick I should say, and this would slot in nicely. Generally, as the game goes on, the habitability bonus is less and less useful, the pop growth speed is very nice, and the leader lifespan is fine. As only a single point, it would be fantastic if it weren't for that massive increase in exotic gas upkeep for each of your pops. Volatile excretions and gaseous byproducts both cost you 2 points and will increase your monthly volatile motes production per pop by plus 0.01 and monthly exotic gas production per pop by plus 0.01 respectively. Both of these are not fantastic from the point of view of maintaining your economy. However, in the early game, they can be very useful if you get stuck in a war or something like that and you don't otherwise have access to volatile motes or exotic gases. This will allow you to trigger the edicts long before you otherwise would be able to, and this could give you a power boost and an advantage very early on if you haven't researched the equivalent technologies to produce these rare resources and are producing them somewhere in your empire. These traits are locked to being lithoids, so you must take that in order to have them though. Juiced Power is the equivalent of Strong, giving you 5% worker and menial drone pop resource output. However, this costs only a single point and only reduces your leader lifespan by -10. That makes it hands and above better than Very Strong, and could see its way into some of your primary species, especially in the early game. Spliced Adaptability gives you plus 20% habitability, minus 10 years of leader lifespan, and only costs a single point. This is the equivalent of a 4-point trait. At the start of the game, this could be very, very useful indeed, although later on as your technology increases, you might want to mod this out. However, unlike the Very Adaptable, it is super easy to mod this out because you don't need to even go down the genetic path to do so, as it is an overtuned trait. Excessive Endurance is the equivalent of a trait locked behind Genetic Ascension, Robust. It gives you plus 5% resources from jobs, plus 30% habitability, but it costs a whopping 3 points and gives you minus 30 years of leader lifespan. The resources from jobs is nice, the habitability can be useful early game. The main benefit to this is that it is all locked behind a single trait pick, and you are locked at the moment to only having 5 possible trait picks. Therefore, it does raise its way up here to the B tier, even though it is very expensive and very punitive to your leader lifespan. When it comes to negative traits, Solitary is the equivalent to Communal. This increases your pop housing usage by 10%. At the very start of the game, and especially if you're a Void Dweller, this can be somewhat unpleasant for your logistic pop growth. It will reduce your growth speed. That is the main time it is annoying. Later on, it can be a little bit better. You can get around it with some technology, that kind of thing, although it's not great right at the start, and that's why it's down here in the C tier, though overall it's not as punitive as some of the other things we can get. And for certain Empire starts and Empire types, you won't notice this at the start of the game at all, and therefore you might want to take it there. And at this point, I would like to say a massive thank you to all of the channel members and patrons who are currently supporting this channel. Your support really makes a difference. If you're enjoying this video and the other videos on this channel and you'd like to support this channel, you can find links to becoming a Patreon or a channel member down in the description below. Now we've made it all the way up to the A tier. Here we've got traits that are really quite good. There might be something which is slightly better than this trait, or there might be some downside to this trait, and that's why it's still here in the A tier and not one tier higher up above us in the S tier. First up, we have a trait from the new Stellaris Toxoids pack, Incubators. This trait is essential to any Void Dweller build going forwards. What this does is it increases your pop speed by 1% per pop below 37 pops, at a maximum of 30% increased pop growth. So at 7 pops and below, you'll be getting that maximum of plus 30% pop growth speed. Above 37 pops, you will lose 1% pop growth speed to a maximum of minus 10%. So this is fantastic on new colonies. It is alright at the very start of the game on your capital, but once you hit 47 pops or above, it is massively negative at minus 10% pop growth speed. This does mean it requires some micromanagement or the genetic ascension in order to remove this trait where you don't need it and put it on colonies where you do need it. Because of the micromanagement needed and its niche effects on habitats, this is why it doesn't quite make it into the S tier. Natural Physicists increases your physics research from jobs by 15%. The physics tech tree is arguably the second best tech tree in the game, and that's why this is above the sociologists in the tier below. Unity is now much more useful in Stellaris. Traditional gives you plus 10% Unity from jobs at the cost of only a single point. Whilst Unity is still not as efficient and not as effective as research output or alloys, it is still very useful and very necessary for a functioning empire. There aren't that many ways of getting bonuses to your Unity production in the game, and that's why Traditional is all the way up here in the A tier. Phototrophic replaces half of the food upkeep with energy. It only costs a single point. This is now up here in the A tier because it is very effective for hive minds specifically in reducing their food upkeep requirements, and thus meaning if you take this in the early game at least, you will definitely not need to have a single farmer. Instead, you can move those pops onto something else and increase your pop efficiency. This is very useful to have, and definitely fits in with part of my ongoing crusade against farmers. Robust is one of those traits that is locked behind the Genetic Ascension finisher. It grants you plus 30% habitability, plus 5% resources from jobs, and plus 50 years of leader lifespan. However, it does cost you a whopping 4 points, but at the time you can access this, you should be swimming in spare trait points. Yes, as the game goes on, that habitability isn't as useful, but overall this is still a very powerful trait. Delicious is also locked behind Genetic Ascension. This one increases your food from livestock and processing by +2. You want to put this on pops that are slaves in your empire that you're using to produce food. It's simply hilarious, only costs 2 points, and by increasing basic food output rather than being some sort of multiplicative modifier, I think it is very powerful. Nerve Stapled also sits behind Genetic Ascension. It costs you a whopping 3 points, but gives you 5% resource output from jobs, and basically prevents the pop from ever doing anything negative in your empire. It will not be affected by happiness, cannot generate leaders, and cannot be employed in ruler, specialist, or complex drone jobs. It also can't join a faction. This is perfect to get rid of any pesky factions that are annoying you or deal with alien slaves. For that reason, it sits up here in the A tier, even though the 5% resources from jobs isn't massively amazing. Finally, Scintillating Skin gives you plus 0.01 monthly rare crystals per pop. This costs you 2 points and is better than the other two equivalents that lithoids have access to. It's better because this allows you to use at the very start of the game the edict to increase your sensor range, and that means you can scout with not just science ships but regular military ships as well, vastly increasing your scouting potential and meaning you will find good planets to colonize faster and faster. Information is power, never forget. Crafted Smiles gives you plus 15% amenities, minus 10 leader lifespan, and costs only a single point. Amenities are great if you increase your amenities from jobs production, you increase your pop efficiency because you need fewer pops working those jobs. Crafted Smiles, like all of these overtuned traits, also stacks with the equivalent trait in the regular trait, so that is quite nice as well. With this and Charismatic, you can get a total of 35% additional amenities. Alright, we're now over 30 minutes through this massive tier list, and well done if you've made it this far. This is it, this is the secret call out. If you've made it this far in the video, please let me know down in the comments below. But let's continue and we'll look at the negative traits in the A tier. When we look at the negative traits in the A tier, we start with Deviance. This refunds a single point but gives us minus 15% governing ethics attraction. Generally speaking, especially if you are spiritualist or fanatic xenophobe or something along those lines, you can pretty much ignore this. Yes, you might get some factions spawning that you otherwise would not get, but they will have very few pops and you can probably suppress them into the dirt, thus making this mostly a free point. And then we have Sedentary, the inverse to Nomadic. Yes, in the early game you will suffer a small amount with that minus 15% pop growth from immigration, and as the game goes on, that plus 25% resettlement cost can be a little bit annoying. But overall, these negatives are probably outweighed by the fact you'll be able to get a really good trait by spending the 1 point you get refunded from this. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the S tier, the creme de la creme of genetic perfection. These are the traits your pops can only dream of having. Charismatic increases your amenities from jobs by 20%. For a Void Dweller, this trait is almost essential because you're going to find amenities a real struggle, especially at the start of the game. For everyone else, this is very useful, as on a planet of around 25 to 50 pops, you're going to find you need 1 to 2 less pops working amenity producing jobs, and they can then work something else instead, giving your empire greater economic potential. Like in any 4X game, in Stellaris, research or technological progress is essential, and that means Intelligent giving you plus 10% resources from jobs across the board at only 2 points is a fantastic trait to pick. Natural Engineers increases your engineering research from jobs by 15% and costs only a single point. It is mutually exclusive with natural physicists and natural sociologists. And because the engineering research tree is, at least in my opinion, the best of the 3 research trees, that puts Natural Engineers up here in the S tier. Rapid Breeders increases your pop growth speed by 10%. In Stellaris, pops means power, so it's simple to see how this equation works. Rapid Breeders is fantastic on basically every species except for those that would not be growing, like a necrophage species. Thrifty costs you 2 points and increases your trade value from jobs by 25%. There's 2 important things to note about this. It is the only trait in the game that you can get at the start of the game at least. You can get some numismatic traits in if you get the right pops from the Caravaneers, but this is the only surefire way to increase the trade value output from your jobs on the planet. Because this increases the base value of the jobs, all of those other trade value bonuses that you get are multiplicative with this additional 25%, making it very, very powerful for trade-based builds. Budding and crystallization both do exactly the same thing. Budding is for regular biological pops, whereas crystallization is the lithoid specific version. Both give plus 0.02 monthly organic pop assembly per pop on the planet. Because you can only get pop assembly of a certain type, you cannot combine this with building robots, though it does stack with organic growth pop assembly like clone vats. This is generally worse than rapid breeders from a pop growth perspective until you reach a certain point at around 20 to 35 pops depending on your logistic growth output. Above 20 to 35 pops, you are always better to have budding. You're going to get more pops more quickly from having this trait. Serviles is a special trait you only get access to if you take the syncretic evolution origin. I do want to mention it because I think it is now very powerful in the game. It gives you plus 10% resources from jobs, plus 10% happiness, although it does lock out your pops from being employed as rulers or specialists and prevent them generating governors or scientists. It does represent the cheapest and most efficient way in terms of trait points to resource output for increasing resource output across the board. Aquatic is a stupidly powerful trait that probably deserves a tier all of its own above the S tier. This gives you plus 20% habitability on ocean worlds, minus 10% housing usage on ocean worlds, and plus 10% worker output on ocean worlds. Yes, you have some negative drawbacks, minus 20% dry and frozen planet habitability, and plus 30% housing usage on dry and frozen planets. But all of those positives only cost a single point, and at the start of the game when you have a single ocean planet and 2 guaranteed ocean planet habitables next to you, that basically combines the traits of very adaptable and double of very strong, and also the communal trait all into a single trait for just 1 point. It is insanely good. This allows your race to get an arm and a leg over its neighboring opposition from an economic perspective. You should always take this trait when it is possible to take it, except there is an issue with it on some habitat stuff, but by that point you're probably going to either have synthetically ascended, gene modded it out, or you've maybe conquered some other pops to go live on your habitats. With regard to the issues on dry and frozen worlds, simply terraform those worlds or don't put your pops on them. It's not particularly difficult. I have done a full video on how stupidly broken and overpowered this trait is. If you want to check that out, there is a link down in the description below. Erudite is almost the best trait in the game for increasing your research output. It gives you plus 20% resources from researcher category jobs, plus 1 leader level cap, and erudite leaders have special traits. They get bonuses to their weapons damage if they're admirals, they get bonuses to research speed if they are researchers, and they also get bonuses if they're governors. This trait is of course locked behind genetic ascension and does cost you a whopping 4 points, but it is almost universally worth it. The last trait in the S tier for the regular normie bio traits is Fertile. It gives you plus 30% pop growth speed and minus 10% pop housing usage. At 4 points, this is 3 times as good as the 2-pointer Rapid Breeders, and it also has the effects of communal rolled in as well, further increasing pop growth from logistic pop growth. Pop growth is really, really good. Slap Fertile onto some pops sat on habitats in the late game and watch them breed like proverbial rabbits as you ship them off to the worlds where you actually need them to work jobs. Looking at the best traits for Overtuned, pre-planned growth is the equivalent of Fertile. It does exactly the same thing, but instead it only costs you 2 points, and you can have this trait from the very start of the game, meaning you can get insane, absolutely insane pop growth. It is also not mutually exclusive with budding, so for Hivemind empires, it's pretty darn nuts. Yes, you do get minus 30 years of leader lifespan, so you probably don't want to take this trait at the start with another trait giving you another minus 30 years. With the augmented traits, around minus 30 to minus 40 years in total is the sweet spot that can be survivable for your leaders if you start off doing the right things early on. Elevated synapses is the equivalent of erudite, and like pre-planned growth, it is something you could take from the very start. You get a whopping 20% research from jobs, plus 2 leader level cap, all at the cost of just 2 points and minus 30 years of leader lifespan. And don't forget, when you turn on Damn the Consequences, this will be doubled up to 40%, and it does not preclude you from taking Intelligent or Erudite, and the other trait we're about to mention, and that is Augmented Intelligence. This gives you plus 10% research from jobs, you do lose 10 years of leader lifespan, and it costs you only a single point. But at only a single point, and only costing you 10 years of leader lifespan, this is a fantastic trait to get on your pops. And you might be somewhat surprised to know that even after the massive rework to Empire Sprawl, where we now can no longer offset it, we can only reduce some of the modifiers, Unruly is still the best negative trait around. It refunds 2 points and gives you plus 10% to Empire Sprawl from pops. That overall change is very minimal. For that 2-point reduction, you can go out and take Intelligent, and that will completely offset any of the negative modifiers from your research output, for example. On top of that, you can modify this trait out of your pops relatively easily, and because it is such a big advantage at the start of the game to be having 2 extra points to spend on traits, and the disadvantage from this doesn't start coming into play until much later on, you can basically ignore this trait and keep using it like you've always used it in Stellaris. But traits are only one part of the overall picture of your empire. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to find out what my thoughts are on traditions, how you can use them, and when you should pick them in your game in Stellaris, click the video on screen now.